Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another great webinar presented by ACFO. As usual, I am Danny Richard, broadcasting live from Gatineau. Different decor here. I mean, as you guys are working from home, so am I. So I managed to get some different backdrop here to promote ACFO better. Today's webinar, we're going to be discussing all about professional development, how training works, what we suggest, why do we offer the courses that we do. And we have with us today Joe Bugner. Perhaps we can go over and say hi to Joe. Morning, Joe.
Morning, Danny. How's everyone doing? I'm actually in the ACFO office for the first time in a very long time. It's very lonely. I'm the only person here. The coffee machine has been unplugged, but I'm hanging in and doing all right. And it's a pleasure to be here to talk about a super important topic like professional development.
Thanks, Joe. So Joe's she's actually the director of communications at ACFO, but he does a lot more, right? Many hats. He's actually acting on doing office things as well. But more importantly, specifically for this one webinar, he also takes care of all the professional development at ACFO. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But I think first what we need to do is talk about an update on COVID-19. So again, just a reminder, if this is you're brand new to our Wednesday webinars, all of our members right now of ACFO should be working from home. And the reason I say this is because basically all of our members can telework. They should be able to. And if you are not able to telework for any reason, you should be on 699. Or if maybe your employer has deemed you critical and you can't telework, then they have asked you to go back to work. But if that's the case, I'm hoping you've already reached out to us, because really there's only a small, minute percentage of our members that I believe would be deemed critical that need to actually physically go back to work. So the big question right now is, how is going to eventual return to work happen? And this is what OCRO is working on, what your departments are working on, and we're getting different information from different people. The most important thing I want you all to know is that for our members at ACFO, there is no rush to return physically back in the office space. Everything should be at home, teleworking. If your manager is telling you that by this date, you're coming back to work physically in the office space, please contact us if this doesn't make sense to you. Now, the reason I say this is because more and more departments now are talking about the return to work. Some departments have put out some dates out there saying, you know what, we're going to return on June 15th or July 1st or whatever it is. That applies to certain levels of classification, certain cities, certain offices only. For our members, generally speaking, the default position is you stay at home, not just for a couple of weeks, for a couple of months here. So if someone is asking you to come back to work, or if you're hearing, hey, have you heard, we're going back to work soon. This is not the case for our members. So again, if someone is telling you come back to work soon, please contact us, because there's no reason, while the pandemic is still there, while there's no vaccine, that we've shown that we can work from home, that we should be physically returning to work. Now, that doesn't mean that the employer shouldn't work on the return to work policies. Of course, we want to know, how's it going to work? Should I wear a mask? How do I go in the elevator? What happens if I'm in the washroom, or can I use the water fountains, right? All these things need to be answered, and we're working with the employer on that right now, so that by the time you do have to eventually go back to work, you've got clear guidelines on how this will actually happen. But the biggest message is, and please share the word, if you're an ACFO member, you're staying at home. If you hear otherwise, please let us know. But that leads us to the question of, what about equipment at work, right? What if you don't have, you're working off a small 13-inch screen? And again, I'm repeating myself, but it's so important for you guys to know this. The employer has recognized that equipment should be provided to you. However, it might take some time before it gets rolled out. Now, what I mean by equipment, I mean everything you need to do your job should be provided to you. So for example, if, for example, you're teleworking and you're working off a kitchen table, or maybe you did have an office at your house, but your office chair wasn't designed to be worked in 8 hours a day. So perhaps you don't have the correct equipment. Now, that doesn't mean you necessarily need an ergonomic assessment, but you might need a better chair, right? By standard, a public service chair is still a quality chair, maybe better than what you have at home. So you need to have that proper equipment. So if you believe you don't have the proper equipment, when I say equipment, it could be anything that you would normally have at work: printer, scanner, chair, mouse, anything you think you need to do your job, you need to flag that to your manager. Now, it might take some time before you get that. By time, I mean weeks or a year, because there's priority zones here, right? Obviously, if someone has an accommodation note by a doctor that says this person needs a chair, they'll be prioritized. If someone is deemed critical, they'll be prioritized. The way the employer is doing this right now for the majority of the departments is they're telling departments, if you already have the equipment at work, we're going to allow you to take it from work and bring it home. Now, there's certain equipment that really doesn't transport well, right? If you have a massive chair and you're driving on a Honda Civic, it might not fit in there. So the employer can actually organize the transportation. But I guess, again, the number one thing is have that dialogue with your manager and be cognizant of the fact that even though you flag it and the employer will probably accommodate you at some point, it might not be right now. But if you have a reduction of your productivity because of that, right? If you're working off a 13-inch screen, you can't be as productive. If your chair is giving you backaches, well, you might not be as productive. You might need to take the 699 leave. If that's the case, please have a conversation with your manager. I want to give you some stats on COVID-19. So the government of Canada, every department has to fill out a chart to indicate how many public servants have been infected by the virus, right? And as of, I have the stats right, as of June 3rd, of all the public servants, there were 394 cases, 394, which is really not enough when you think about it, right? Compared to the number of public servants that they are. And I'll break that down for you because we're numbers people, right? Half of those cases, 189, are in the province of Quebec. But when I say Quebec, that excludes the NCR region. So that's Quebec, but non-NCR. The second most area is the NCR. They've got 72 cases in the NCR. And the third one is in Ontario with 49 cases. Again, when I say Ontario, that's excluding the NCR. So as you can see, different areas have different level of cases, which means you might not be returning to work at the same time, depending on which city that you live in. And that makes sense. But I want to share those stats with you to show that even though we have to be very careful here, if your employer does ask you to go back to work and you feel it's necessary because you do certain work, for example, I had a case where people working on public accounts had to go back to work and the employer asked for volunteers and people did go back to work, that if we follow protocol and everything is being followed, we can have a secure workspace. But by default, everyone should stay home. That's my update for the COVID-19. I want to talk a bit about the the ACFO survey. So every year we do a survey of our members to figure out what's going on. I spoke about this last week, if you remember. This survey is so critical, friends, because this is where you tell us what's happening in your departments, both prior to COVID and post-COVID. This survey takes you at most 10 minutes. I did it myself. It's less than 10 minutes. We are so close to reaching a critical mass right now. And what I mean by that is certain departments are smaller than others, and we cannot divulge the results or we can't have conclusive data unless we have a certain number of people that actually fill out the survey. So please spread the word to fill out the survey so we have information to go back to your CFOs and say, hey, here's the main concerns that we're hearing at the grassroots level, and you want to see this addressed. And I can assure you, your CFOs listen to this data. The data speaks for itself. Another element I want to talk about is the leave, the vacation time. If you recall, I discussed this on another webinar where typically now for the past couple of years, the employer has been allowing us to carry over the 35 vacation days that we normally couldn't carry over. It wouldn't be cashed out, right? So if you, for example, this year aren't able to take your vacation because of COVID, because you're stuck at home, you can't travel, whatever reason might be, we need to know if the employer will be allowing in March of 2021, will they be allowing us to go over again the 35 days? Because if they don't, we need to know right now. So A, we can make a good case for it. And that B, we can actually prepare to take vacation if need be. Because we put a communique on our website on this, the employer could technically force our members to take vacation. It needs to be reasonable here, but they could force it. There's a communique on our website on there right now. All right, let's get to the topic at hand. And I know I'm speaking fast there, but we got a lot of things to cover. We're going to be talking about professional development today. And as you're probably aware, this is a game changer with COVID because all the in-person events are being canceled, right? Like FMI week was canceled. They just announced this last week. CPA is changing to online. Joel talked about this. We'll be going online as well for certain CTC courses. So we thought it would be useful to talk about what ACFO does in terms of professional development. And the reason I brought Joe in is because he's the lead on this project. Like I was saying before, he's not just a director of comms. You know, he teaches at Algonquin. He's taught at Carleton. He knows all about teaching, but also he develops our program. And I don't want to steal Joe's thunder here, but I think for us, it's important to discuss PD with our members because we know that you guys want to grow. We know that professional development is important for you as well. Not just your career development, but your professional development. So without further ado, actually, no, Slido. Let me talk about Slido. Slido. So we're going to be taking your questions via Slido today, as we always do. You know how Slido works by now, but if it's your first time, if you want to ask a question to Joe or myself or any question on any topic, you go on slido.com. That's SLIDO. As you can see on your screen right now, people are already asking some questions. You enter the code ACFO-ACAF. That's your code, gives you access to this slide right now where you can ask all your questions anonymously. We ask that you first ask questions related to professional development, and then if you have other questions, we'll answer COVID or whatever it might be, but we'll focus really on professional development. Si vous avez des questions en français, sentez-vous à l'aise de poser en français. Joe comprend le français, mais je vais sûrement répondre à sa place pour les réponses en anglais. So without further ado, I will send it over to Joe Bugner. Joe, over to you. Joe, you're on mute.
See, I should know these sorts of things. What I was actually just saying is that what our members may not know is I've actually been on every webinar we've done in the back end, just producing the webinars. And for a little bit of fun, I'm also producing this one. So I'm both pushing buttons and trying to speak to you, and that explains why I do stuff like leave my mic on mute when I should really know better. All of that being said, so as Danny said, ACFO understands that our members look to us for professional development more and more. It was a new line of business for us maybe a decade ago, but with events like the Spring Tune-Up growing in popularity and credibility year after year, we've been in a lucky position to be able to offer professional development to our members. And the reason we wanted to do that is because every time we survey our members, every time we survey you guys about what is important to you in advance of collective bargaining or through the State of the Community survey that Danny was talking about earlier, what we hear over and over is that professional development is second really only to issues around, say, money and leave. So we understand that professional development is important, and accessing professional development is important because of the professional nature of our group. So like I said, we started with Spring Tune-Up, that grew over the years, and in the last couple of years, we were able to secure funding for the Joint Career Development Program at the bargaining table. That's $1 million that goes into courses that we can offer to our members free of charge for them. It's co-managed with the employer, and we've seen that program do really well. But the other thing with that program is we found more and more that the demand still exceeded our capacity to meet it. We weren't able to supply the same amount of professional development that you guys were asking us for. So within the last year or so, we've started rolling out our own programs through what we've called the Controllership Training Center. So it's an in-house PD institute that we own and operate. And through that, we're able to develop and deliver even more programming than we can through the JCDP. Obviously, with all the restrictions being put in place with COVID-19 and with some major changes to events like FMI PD Week, we're looking for opportunities to change and expand what we can offer to you guys through the Controllership Training Center. So we're going to get into that in a few minutes. Danny's also going to talk a little bit about what's going on with the Joint Career Development Program and the programming changes that we're looking at there, because obviously it's a moving target in terms of adapting to the restrictions in place because of COVID. But what I wanted to do first is take just a couple of minutes to talk about what it means to do online learning. Online learning is something, it's obviously growing in popularity. There's a lot of good reasons for that, but setting yourself up to be successful in online learning can look a little bit different than doing a class or a conference in person. So I want to talk briefly about the different kinds of online learning you might experience, and then help you get set up for success by talking about some tips. So when you talk about what does online learning look like, there's typically sort of two kinds of online learning. There's what we call synchronous or real-time online learning, and there's asynchronous. So synchronous is an example of, this is an example of synchronous if you're watching it in real time. We also make it available after the fact, which is asynchronous, right? So synchronous, you come together, you meet at a certain time. You've got a designated time, you come together and you consume your course. Now, that can look very different. There can be really interactive sorts of synchronous online. And I'm going to give you an example, which I think might be the best online learning I've seen delivered. And oddly, I watched it as my 10-year-old went through a coding workshop right at the start of the pandemic. So apparently the 10-year-olds are getting the best of online learning right now. So she took part in a coding workshop that had about 25 participants, all kids. And the way they did it, it was done via Zoom or one of these online learning platforms. And what made it really effective is it was completely interactive. So the full group would get together, all 25, and watch a person do a demonstration. So everybody's line was muted, because as you can imagine, 25 10-year-olds can be a bit chatty. They muted everybody's line, they gave the demonstration, and then they broke them off into smaller breakout groups on this online learning platform, this online video platform. And then each of those groups had a moderator assigned to it, and that's where they would actually work through. So they'd see the demo, they'd break off into a small group and work through it at a really low ratio. That was amazing because they could ask questions, they could get instant support one-on-one essentially, or one in a small group, and then go back to the larger group and work through the bigger concepts. So I think that would be the ideal model for all online learning, except that you can understand it's expensive and difficult to scale. In this case, it was run by a volunteer-based organization. They had volunteers who could do the facilitation. But maintaining a 1-to-4, 1-to-5 ratio doesn't scale particularly well for a lot of courses. So what you see instead is a lot of online learning that's still synchronous, but it's in larger groups. So this webinar is a great example. We're able to take questions from you guys through Slido. We're able to make it interactive. You could also do things like polling. You could have in more of a Zoom type platform where your cameras are visible too, and we can go back and forth. That kind of stuff works fairly well. But again, the minute you start to get too big, it starts to get unworkable unless you've got sort of smaller breakout groups. The other thing you're seeing a lot more of now, and is because it scales so well, is asynchronous online learning. And that's where curriculum or materials are posted in advance. It might just be a video, it might be a slideshow you click through, or a narrated slideshow, and you do the work at your own pace. So obviously there's a lot of benefits to that. It's more flexible in terms of scheduling, it's available on demand. There's some degree of interaction there as well, whether you're sort of quizzed as you go along, which is a lot of stuff that's requirement, like workplace safety training, for example. You have to validate your learning by clicking through a quiz. I actually did a master's program at Carleton that was primarily online, and we would participate in discussion boards. So within the span of a week, you knew what you had to cover, but you could kind of go in anytime during the week and participate. Obviously, the drawbacks there are you lose that real-time interaction. You lose that ability to have a conversation and a debate. People might post something in a discussion board, but they don't go back and check it for a few days, and sort of the pace of the discussion gets lost. So there's lots of drawbacks and benefits to all those kinds of online learning. And the thing I want to stress to you is just make sure you know what you're signing up for and plan accordingly. If you're signing up for something that's going to be depending on you going in on your own schedule, consuming the video, watching the videos, participating maybe in a discussion board, just participating by answering a quiz, make sure you know that's what you're getting into and clear yourself some time to do that. It can be really tempting to do that while also watching something on Netflix, or do that maybe while you're making dinner. And I understand the realities of the strange world we're living in right now. There's a temptation to do that. Just understand that you're not necessarily getting the same richness of the learning. Wherever possible, clear yourself some time, clear yourself some space without distraction. And when you're doing that as well, resist the temptation to do it all at once. Even if it's an hour-long video, every 15 minutes or so, hit pause, get up, get away from your screen, stretch your legs a little bit, because the longer you sit there just passively consuming the content, the less likely you are to actually retain it. If you're doing something online in real time, something more synchronous, obviously that's even more important to clear yourself the space. Even if your camera's not on and you're just watching the video, try to dedicate some time and energy to being able to sit and focus and really take it in. But the biggest thing, and I don't want to go on too long because I know I can see the questions already piling up in Slido, so we want to get through this fairly quickly. The biggest takeaway, I think, is know what kind of training you're in for. Be as familiar as you can with the platform, be it Zoom, be it a webinar, whatever it might be, and clear yourself some time and space. I know that's difficult. Obviously, if it's on-demand learning, you've got a little bit more flexibility, but as much as you can, try to replicate that experience of being in the classroom. Sit down, have your undivided attention, focus on it, and you get a lot more out of it. So as we're developing and planning for both the Joint Career Development Program and the courses we're offering through the CTC, we're obviously focused on trying to make sure we're delivering the content the best way we can. And a lot of success in online learning really depends on how the course is developed and delivered. But the learner has a role to play too. And we hope that you'll be able to clear that time, clear that attention, and get the most out of it. I've talked for probably long enough at this point, so I'm going to throw it back to Danny, and he's going to walk you through some of the changes we're planning for the Joint Career Development Program, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about some of the offerings for the CTC before we get to your questions. Over to you, Danny.
Thanks, Joe. And you brought up a really good point about the different types of online training, because ACFO, typically our default position was we already preferred to have in-person training opportunities, in-person conferences for many reasons, right? You're better network, get a feel for the crowd, but also it takes you away from the distractions of your day-to-day work. So for us now, we're looking at the Joint Career Development Program, which is really the $1 million training fund that we have specifically for the CT Fins in the collective agreement. We had to rethink the way we're going to offer it in this fiscal year, simply because we can't have in-person events, right? Unless something changes with COVID, we're going to have to go probably with the online experience. But the way we want to do this is not to have canned material, because canned material can get quite boring, it numbs your brain out. When I'll say, I've seen this many times, I do this myself. Well, we'll often just click on the next button to get to the next slide, and We just want to have the CPD credit, and we it doesn't matter to us. Next. Whereas when you have a webinar, when you have an instructor that is live, you can interact with other people. You can actually have the direct feedback from both ends. And that's really important because you want to have a really learning experience. And that's one thing you want to do with this $1 million training fund. We want to make sure that we solve two problems. The first one we want to solve is training that solves a problem. It's training that our members need. At ACFO, we're well positioned to know what our members' challenges are because we hear from you guys. We hear from you with, here's what I need help with. But we also hear from senior managers that say, you know what, Danny, here's the challenge I'm facing with your members. So we take all that feedback and we say, where should we focus the training on? So it's not based on what we like. Don't get me wrong. I know we like Excel. We like to do various works with numbers, but that's one of our strengths, generally speaking. So instead of enhancing our strengths, we really want to focus on improving our areas of improvement because that's our challenge, not just for our career professionally, but to add real value. So the Joint Career Development Program for this year, initially we want to do a lot of in-classroom training. We're going to be changing the format to a lot of stuff online, but it's still going to be interactive. But more importantly, it's going to solve some issues, really challenges that you guys are facing. So I'll give an example. We work closely with the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. This is the organization led by Kevin Page. We had him as a speaker a couple of weeks. And we spoke a couple of weeks ago, you want to ensure that we can actually address certain challenges, right? A lot of members were asking, is there going to be another draft with COVID? Okay, well, if there's a draft, how does that work? You want to know the process behind the draft. And I can tell you, Kevin and his team have been through many drafts. So we can give training specific on how does draft happen at a high level, and then how does that get ingrained at the grassroots level. So we can have training specifically on that. So we're putting a halt right now on the applications for the Joint Career Development Program because we have to rethink the formula. We're going to relaunch it, and you guys can apply for it. And the best thing is, the training provided from the JCDP, everything is paid for, is free for you guys. So you don't need to worry about, how much does it cost? Do I need to put in my learning plan? I mean, you still need to put in your learning plan because you need the employer to give you the time off to actually go through the training. But the good news is there's no financial cost to you guys. And the best part is there's a wide range of courses you can select from. So look out for the next college going to come out. It's a lottery. So if say we have 1,000 people that apply for the courses, it's a lottery. So it doesn't matter who you know. It's not about connection. This is really pure lottery. And everyone has the same and equal chance of actually getting access to these courses. So the JCDP is coming again. We hope you actually apply for it. And for the Controllership Training Center, I wanted to mention something. One of the members asked me, why do we call it the Controllership Training Center? Which is a great question, right? And the reason we called that is because we are now the controllership group now, and it's not really been marketed by the employer yet. They're still working on it, by the way. I mean, everything related to the controllership group, the CT FINs or the EAVs or the IASs, the information has been provided by ACFO because we're on the ball. We know what's coming. But for the employer, there's many other priorities. So eventually they'll get down to actually changing the classification. So formally, the classification now, you all are controllers. Controller, FIN, or controllers, there's 3 letters. But that's why we went with the Controllership Training Center, because we focus on training financial professionals. The same way ACFO is a union that only represents financial professionals, we only train financial professionals. That's a training that we offer because we are here for you. That is what we care about. That is in our mandate. That's what we want to add value. If you look at our mission and our vision, that's what we're all about, training for you guys. So if ever you have an idea about something we need training on, feel free to share it with us. But I would caveat that by saying, make sure it's a training that's not already available. So I'll give an example. When people have asked me, hey, can we have language training? Language training is a lot of money and it makes sense. Language training is more difficult because it should be provided by the employer, right? If you're struggling and you need to get to the next level, that one should come from the employer. When we look at our offerings, we tend to focus on the soft skills because that's where we see the biggest gap. And it is by far the biggest gap. And I put myself in that category where we need to be in terms of soft skills. What are my soft skills? Leadership, having conversations, addressing with emotional intelligence. These are things that as financial professionals, we typically did not put the emphasis on during our education and training because we didn't need to. All the focus was on the technical skills. I'm not saying technical skills we can improve on, but I'm saying our biggest area of improvement is definitely those soft skills. And again, I put myself in this. If I compare myself to 10 years ago, I've grown a lot. I can't even imagine 10 years from now how I can grow personally from this. So that's the only comments I had on that one. Joe, maybe we can go over and take some questions. Go over to Slido. So again, if you want to ask questions to Joe or myself, you go to slido.com and you're going to put in the code ACFO-ACAF, and I see I have some questions right now. So Joe, over to you for the questions.
Sure, thanks, Danny. Yeah, and I think you touched on the first one a little bit, but I'll build on what you were saying. So, it's moved down. Well, I'll take the one that was the first one until a second ago, the technical training. I think it's something you've spoken to as well. When we're developing the courses, especially for the Controllership Training Center, but as well for the Joint Career Development Program, we're really trying to make sure that our members are being enabled to progress in their careers. And so to do that, we take the feedback that we're getting from senior management. And, we could debate whether it's fair feedback or not, but the feedback that we tend to get is that when our members are looking for promotion, when our members are looking to move up in the ranks, it's not the technical skills that are the gaps and the weaknesses. It's the things like Danny talked about, the leadership skills, the communication skills, the understanding empathy and emotional intelligence. So that's one of the reasons we focus so much on that in our training, is because that's where the skill gap has been identified by the people who have control over your career development. The other reason is we think that there's already a lot of people in the market delivering courses on Excel, delivering courses on Power BI. Granted, there's a lot of people in the market delivering communications courses as well, but the lens that we're able to bring to it based on our experience representing financial folks is what makes it a differentiator. So our communications course, which I've developed and deliver, and a few of you hopefully have taken, is based on both communications fundamentals, but also the reality of working in finance in the public service or NAV Canada. We're developing an in-house course on emotional intelligence right now, based on the same methodology of emotional intelligence as you get elsewhere, but applied to the finance profession in the public sector in NAV Canada. So it's I think easy to go out in the market and find that Excel training, find that Power BI training, and obviously it's going to be geared for people who work in those kinds of professions. What we want to bring is tailored training that's tailored to our membership in those other areas. So that speaks to why we focus the way we do. That being said, this year's JCDP will also include some Power BI training, because that's a necessary stepping stone for future skills around artificial intelligence and data automation. So it's not that we're against these things. We'll offer them when they make sense. But we think right now it makes the most sense to be invested in courses around the soft skill, things like that. Danny, there's a great question there about branching out training in the regions. Why don't I throw that one over to you, if that's all right?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's a good point here brought up, because one of the challenges we do face at ACFO is, although the majority of our members, 70% are in the NCR, we are spread out across Canada. And I like where the question comes from here is, why not partner up with universities? And I think it would be a great idea. The challenge, however, is that we're in every major city. And now we require teaming up and developing curriculum with every single university. So instead, what we're trying to do is deliver the material virtually. So deal with the university. So IFSD is from the Ottawa U, and deal with the university so we can apply the same training to all our members, regardless of where they're at. And actually for this year, we're working on delivering a webinar with the University of Ottawa. And it's just a matter here of capacity, right? As you can imagine, if we go to every single university, there's two problems we're going to have. One is it's a lot of universities to start collaborating with, and two, we might not have sufficient mass in that city to apply for all the work that needs to be done, right? We need a cohort of at least 20 people. We might not have 20 of our members that are going to be winning the lottery for JCDP in that city. So we think that collaborating with the university makes sense, because if they have material they've already taught on, we can just tweak it to our members and then broadcast it to as many members as we can actually get. Joe, I'll take this one as well on how many days, hours are reasonable. But I saw one that says, how could I convince my boss to take language training? So maybe you can take that one afterwards. Or maybe the mentorship program as well. So how many days, hours is reasonable to attend training PD in a fiscal year? After 3 or 4 days, my requests get denied, even if they are free at no cost. Is this fair? Another good question. There is no standard or guideline of professional development. I will share you my guidelines. This is a rule of thumb here. You should be able to qualify for at least either $1,500 worth or 5 days, either or. Now, that doesn't mean you can't qualify for more. Absolutely. If you can build a case, you could definitely qualify for more. But if a member were to come back to me and said, I was given a maximum of $500 and or 1 or 2 days, that's not sufficient to keep your skill set updated. And often departments will do this. They will say, well, you know what, we really didn't receive lots of training budget this year, so we're going to have to scale back on that one. So you only get $300, right? That is, pardon my French, BS. When departments receive their budgets, they do not receive them by line item, right? It's O&M and salaries. It's capital versus, it doesn't make any sense in terms of the training. So If you're being pushed back on regarding the number of dollars or days, have a conversation with your manager, but you've got to be delicate on how you approach this. This is where the soft skills come in. It's the same thing as your PMA. So for example, in this case, if someone says, all right, I had 5 PD days and maybe I spent $1,000, and now I'd like to do 3 other days and they're free, right? You want to come to the spring tune-up. It's going to be free, absolutely free. The spring tune-up is free. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention the spring tune-up. The spring tune-up is going to be not in person this year. It'll be virtually. And most likely it'll be held over 2 afternoons, so back-to-back afternoons, because as Joe was mentioning, there's a bit of fatigue online learning. So we do like from an afternoon one day, the afternoon the next day, and it's completely free. So in this case, if a manager were to say, well, you've reached your max training for this year, it doesn't make any sense to me. As long as you can get your job done, 1 day is not going to change anything. So it'll be very delicate on how to have the conversation. If you want some coaching on this, contact us at ACFO. You know, we deal with these cases where we will ghostwrite for our members. Your boss won't even know you're talking to us. But if you're planning on sending an email, we can maybe sift through that email and say, maybe change the tone of the email. Maybe recommend saying this or saying that instead of it. So the way you see it, to say it is very important. So if anyone is being denied training that they think doesn't really make sense, please contact us. We can see, hey, if it does make sense. And if it's not, how do you word it to actually address it properly? Joe, what questions do you want to take next?
Yeah, I'll address the question on mentorship, Danny, because it's something that we've actually talked about internally as well. We know that having members exposed to the work of other members is really useful. It's why we've got things like the interchange program through the Joint Career Development Program. Unfortunately, the interchange is likely one of the things that's going to have to drop off this year because it requires travel and presence in an office. But it's why we've done things like the interchange. It's why we've done things like the job swap. Having participated in mentorship programs myself, both as a mentor and as a mentee, there are a lot of work to make them effective. And so thus far, we haven't been able to find the right mix because the participants in the program need to do a lot of the work to make it successful. But it's something we've certainly talked about with the Comptroller General's office and with some of the community leads around the public service. And it's with the need to focus and rethink the program, it's something that we might end up bringing forward again to look at again, because it's something that we certainly see the value of it. The downside is they can be a lot of work to set up and to maintain. I mean, I shouldn't say that. It's easy to set them up. It's easy to do the matching and the pairings, but oftentimes it requires a lot of coaching of the mentor and the mentee to make sure that they get the most out of it. So it's certainly something that we see the value in, though. It's why we do things even like networking nights, right? And trying to facilitate, expanding your network as a professional, meeting more people and being exposed to more work and more experience. So it's my very long way of saying we've looked at it before, and I think it's probably time to look at it, how we might be able to do it again, if not for this year, for future years. Because Danny is one of the biggest proponents I know of that networking and building the relationships, and a mentorship program is a really good way to do that. Danny, I'll throw it back over to you if there's one off near the top you want to grab now.
Yeah, I'll touch on the one-on-one training, but I'll just maybe follow up on Joe was saying, because I agree with everything Joe said. And I'll tell you, based on my experience, the best mentorship you can actually get is when it happens organically, right? When it's not necessarily organized. That doesn't mean I'm against organized mentoring. I think it's great. I think it's a great idea. But the best ones I've seen in my career is having conversations with people without necessarily formalizing it, without saying, oh, will you be my mentor and I'll be your mentee and we have an official documented thing. And that goes to the value of, again, getting your name out there. And you might be asking, okay, well, Danny, how do I do that? How do I get mentored by someone else? Get your name out there, right? Participate in various activities. I love the movie with Jim Carrey, Yes Man, right? When someone asks for something, yes, just say yes. And you might not have time for it, but try to be cognizant that if you want to get your name out there, you need to go outside the box and not just in your specific duties. So volunteer in various things, and you'll see pretty easily, you'll find people that you can relate to, that you see, wow, they seem to got their things together, and I see myself in terms of following their path and just bounce ideas off them. Next question we have in popularity is, can ACFO provide 101 training on the different finance streams? Someone working in accounting ops only may not get experience in systems or resource management. Guys, I love your questions, all right? Let me share my story with you. When I started in the government maybe 15 years ago, was at CRA, and then I started as an FI, and they said, oh, you're going to do the forward rotation. Which FI streams would you like to do? And I said, well, I have no idea what they are. And then when they showed me what they meant, I said, well, what does that really entail? Because if one thing I've learned now in my career is that the financial streams are not necessarily the same depending on which department you're in. So financial operations to D&D might mean something else to a department like NRCan or PCO, because the difference in the department size, right? So, but I do get where the question is coming from, where how can we better train our members so that they understand the core functions? And this is where we want to turn to the Canada School of Public Service, because the Canada School, for them to say the 101 courses. You remember back in the day they had the F111, F112, that was really generic to understanding finance, but we can do a deeper dive into those so that when you start as a member, as a CFO, you have an idea of what the streams are. Because when you want to build on your career, say, for example, we mentioned here operations. Say you've been working financial operations for 5 years. You've got a good grasp on them. And you're like, it's okay, but maybe I'd want to work in corporate or financial management, or I want to work in systems. But I'm not sure what that job is. So if we could be either through mentorship or job shadowing or having courses with the Canada School, it would actually help facilitate this. And this is where I think we can work with the Office of Controller General to develop that guide, because I get where the question is coming from. How do I know how to apply to different streams when I don't really know what they are? So it wouldn't be through the Joint Career Development Program, because this is something I think the departments can fund themselves. But I do like where the question is coming from. Joe, over to you for our next question you'd like to take.
Yeah, I will very quickly take the question about CTC and FMI, and then maybe I'll get into the second language question that's been sitting there as well for a while as well. So no, the CTC and FMI are not the same thing. So FMI, ACFO and FMI have had a long-standing relationship. We support each other's work, but FMI is a standalone independent organization. It's an independent nonprofit. We know that many of our members are also FMI members. But they are a standalone organization. They have their own board of directors, their own agenda, and they produce training that they think is of value to our community. They also represent people at the provincial level, municipal level, and beyond. The CTC is entirely owned and operated by ACFO. It is our own in-house training and development institute, and some of the programming may be similar, but we're certainly, it's our own. It's something we have full control over, and we're able to use that to make sure that we're responsive to the needs of the marketplace and the needs of our own members' career development. So the short answer is no, they're not the same, despite us having a good relationship with FMI and working quite closely. We sponsor a lot of FMI events, and I think that's where the confusion comes in. Is because we're present at most of the FMI events in the NCR. We're always present at PD Week, but we are different organizations. The question about convincing your supervisor to take language training if you already meet the language profile for your position. That's one of those things that it's going to be obviously dependent on case by case. And I think, again, it speaks to the importance of the soft skill. I know it sounds like we're kind of a broken record when it comes to soft skill training and encouraging that, but because ultimately what you're trying to do there is persuade and convince somebody. Like I say, if you already meet the profile for your position, it's not necessarily a requirement per se, but it's something you want to do to enhance and develop your career. And so you need to persuade. You need to be able to have a conversation, explain the benefits for yourself, but also ideally explain the benefits for your supervisor, your team, and your department, right? The ability to understand other people's motivations, what other people need to get out of it, and how you can fill that is a lot of the stuff that's covered off in emotional intelligence, for example, or the course we offer on office politics and building alliances and understanding influence in the office. All that stuff is going to help you more than saying, make this argument X, Y, and Z, because ultimately what you're dealing with there is an issue of persuasion, not something that you're entitled to or not. So, we might be able to help out on a case-by-case basis, and sort of a blanket answer. And anytime you're having difficulty accessing training, certainly give us a call and we'll see how we can help. But it really speaks to the importance of nurturing that relationship, delivering value in that relationship, and persuading someone along the way. So I think the soft skill stuff can be really useful in that for that specific case. Danny, I'll throw it back over to you, and if you want to grab the next question there.
Yeah, I'll grab that. I'll talk the one about the masks, and I want to add on to what you said, Joe, because I completely agree with you, and I think it's also a matter of the employer seeing the value. And I'll tell you the best trick that I know of to get language training, right? Because I get where the question is coming from. Your boss is saying, look, you have the letters that you need to do your job. It's there, but we talk about career progression. If I want to become to the next level, that level might be a CBC, and I'm not there yet. So the best way to get language training, in my opinion, is to show your value. If you've been flagged as someone that's adding value, positive attitude, team player, management will want to make you get up to the next level. Because sometimes what happens is, say you're new to a team and maybe you're not a CPA yet, and they'll say, hey, you'll ask, can I have my CPA paid for? I'll say, okay. And then that's done. You say, can I have my language training paid for? The employer is investing a lot of money into you, and they don't know yet if they're going to get that value back, because if you're changing to another department, maybe you switch to the private sector. So you try to be reasonable in terms of telling you what, let me show my value to you guys so that if I invest in this organization, you'll be willing to return the favor, invest in me. That is the one universal trick that I find works well, is when you're adding value, it is really more likely the employer will be willing to pay that language training. I saw one on masks. So there was one on masks. Will ACFO be providing masks for the eventual return to work? We could. The reason we won't, however, is because A, we want to use your union dues as best fit, right? This is something the employer should be providing. So if you're asked to return to work, your employer should be providing you a face mask. So this is a face mask that you should have access to, because you won't be able to maintain the 2-meter distance. So if the employer is refusing to provide you with face masks, please let us know. But this is something we brought up right from the get-go, that this notion that we can maintain the 2-meter distance is simply not true. We're in elevators, and we're in hallways, and the washroom, or the cafeteria. So we want to make sure the employer is making face masks readily available. Joe, over to you. The next question.
Yeah, Danny, there's a series of questions related to PD credit. So I'm gonna start answering that, and then you as a CPA can probably speak to it in a little bit more detail. But there's a number of questions there about can you get credits for watching Spring Tune-Up online? Does our training qualify for credit hours? And there was even a question about, does this webinar count as training? So when we've approached CPA in the past, what we've been told is that there's no such thing as blanket approval for an event. They won't say that this event is guaranteed to give you CPD hours, particularly because, we're talking about different jurisdictions as well, CPA Ontario versus CPA Quebec and so on. That being said, we try to develop programming that we think is going to meet the criteria for CPD hours. And for things like Spring Tune-Up and things like the courses we offer, we do provide a certificate that says, John Smith has attended 7.5-hour webinar on, or 7.5-hour course on this topic. That's what we can provide. So in the past at Spring Tune-Up, we've been able to do that. This year's Spring Tune-Up, we're still working through the mechanics of that, because the one thing that we have to be able to do is attest that you were there. It's why when you go to a lot of events, they will stamp your name tag, or that you have to drop something in a box to prove you're there. That's the only thing we can control, is whether or not we can attest that you were there and what the curriculum was. It's for that same reason that this webinar likely won't get you there, because we wanted to make these webinars as accessible as possible without any registration, because it's through the browser, so you don't necessarily have to have an MS Teams account or anything like that. We want to make these widely available, so we don't know who attends these webinars. It's anonymous unless you sign in by Teams. So it's not the sort of thing that we can verify your attendance. But things like the courses we're developing, including the online version, and things like the conferences and development days like Spring Tune-Up, including the online version, we're working hard to make sure that we can say, this person attended a professional development day for 8 hours, then you can take that certificate and make it as part of your PD claim. Danny, do you want to speak to maybe some of your experience actually claiming some of these things as a CPA?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joe. I can speak to this because we've actually looked into this, but I myself have spoken with CPA Canada on this. So, CPA Canada is an overarching organization, and they all have their provinces. And Joe mentioned this. Their definition of the criteria of CPD differs, so they won't issue a blanket one. But generally speaking, here's the rule of thumb. As long as the training is relevant to your field of work, which is relevant to being a CPA, they will accredit you that time. Now, in terms of receiving confirmation, you need one of two things: either proof of payment that you paid for the event, or attendance that you were there. And as Joe mentioned, we don't know who you are right now because we want to make it very simple. So this session, we can't attest to it. Now, if you want to claim it as 1 hour, you could make the case saying, look, I was there, I attended, but CPA might come back and say, okay, can you prove it? Because one of the things has to be a verifiable hour. That's why a few years ago, ACFO changed with the Spring Tune-Up to actually provide you with certificates. And I also want to mention something, because I don't think many people know this. When you go to a conference, typically, again, depending on which CPA province you're with, lunch and break is not a CPD credit. So that's why when ACFO gives you your attendance sheet, we'll typically specify including like an hour lunch and break, because although we give you an attendance, you were there, you decide how many hours that you claim, because again, it has to be relevant to your career. I've attended certain conferences, and I won't say which names, that I look at the speakers and I say, this is not relevant at all to my career. It was entertaining, but did I learn anything of value? And therefore, should I be asking for the CPD credit for the hour? So it's up to you to claim what is relevant to you. But Generally speaking, spring tune-up, yes. I mean, we pick our speakers to ensure that is relevant to our members, so that's a no-brainer. It's very easy. Joe, I'll take this one on. I work hard getting my CPA designation and get the same benefits as my other non-designated FI colleagues. Was it worth to get through all this? Another good question. I will tell you that later in your career, it will definitely benefit you. But if you're earlier on, you're saying I'm being paid the same salary, receive the same opportunities. There's this whole notion of should we push towards more professionalization of the group or less? Because the reality is there are certain people that have been working. For example, I've been an FI2 for 25 years. If I don't have a CPA designation, does that mean someone that does is better than me? Well, it depends on their knowledge, education, experience. There's various factors that goes into that. But if the notion is, why did I do my CPA if there's no payback? I can assure you, if you progress in your career, there will definitely be a compensation for this. And this is something, by the way, that we've proposed to the employer when we're negotiating, is to give a premium based on education, on diplomas. So for example, if you're bilingual, you get a premium, which by the way, the premium is completely outdated. It hasn't changed in like 20 years. We're working on this with NJC. But we've proposed that, for example, if you have a CPA designation, you have $1,000 more. If you have an MBA, you have more. CFA, you have more. It's something the employer is not really looking into right now, because they're saying it's not because you have a designation that you need it to do your job, right? So there's a fine line there. But to answer the question, the more educated you are, it never hurt anyone, that's for sure. And because the employer paid for it and you're investing in your career, I think it's definitely worth it. Joe, over to you for the next question.
Thanks, Danny. And I'm going to get greedy. I'm going to take the next two, because there's one that's a fairly short answer, then one that's a slightly longer answer. So the question about the spring tune-up career fair. I love that this question came up, because it means that people saw value in the career fair last year. Last year was the first time we experimented this. We had 20 some odd departments set up with booths, collecting one-page CVs from people who might be interested in a deployment or a new opportunity. And there was a lot of take-up from that. We were really excited to see that, and we were really excited to run that again this year. How do we replicate that virtually? So around the same time, shortly after the spring tune-up last year, we actually launched something on the ACFO website called the CV inventory. Admittedly, we launched it with one email, and we haven't really pushed it a lot since then, because we wanted to sort of get a sense of how it was working. But you can go on the ACFO website today and fill out a form that replicates a CV. So you don't actually upload a CV, you just fill out a form with that same kind of information. And then you go into a repository of people looking for deployments or new opportunities. We've also promoted it with hiring managers, and we get periodic requests from hiring managers who might say, you know, I'm looking for an FI2 with experience in costing who could, with a BBB language profile. And then we can provide them that list of names. Now, we don't vet the information in there. We make no claim on its validity. It's still up to the hiring managers to do the legwork. We just provide a list of candidates. So it replicates a little bit what was done. What's missing is that opportunity to have that conversation, that networking one-on-one. We're still looking to see if that kind of piece of it can be replicated. We're not sure yet, but at the very least, you can always go on the ACFO website and complete your form for the CV inventory. So that's that question. The other question, and I'll answer it first, Andy, and I'll throw it back to you based on your experience as well. I've done several technical and soft skill trainings, not to say that more can't be done, but how can I find what kind of training would be best for me? That's a wonderful question, and I love that you're taking such an active interest in finding the things that you need to find. The answer, unfortunately, is it kind of depends on where you are in your career and what it is you want to accomplish, right? If you're worried about career development and career progression, what I would recommend is, you know, the OCG has their, I forget the name of the tool, the FI to CFO career model. So that might give you some ideas of the sorts of skill sets you might be looking for. Look at the posters of the jobs you want to be your next job and see if there's an area where there's a gap in your skills so you can go out and start to fill them. Maybe you've got a lot of experience in costing and you want to move into FMA, but there's a lot of client relationship and business knowledge and face-to-face interaction, so I should do training geared towards that. The other thing to do, especially if you're keen on getting the training approved, is talk to your manager or make it part of your PMA process. We did a webinar last week on PMAs, which is on our website. You can go back and watch it if you didn't see, but that might be an opportunity there too. Is there a gap in your skills that your manager, your supervisor has identified? Is there something more that you could be doing based on their read of your career and your function and your work? So there's lots of places to look. It kind of depends on what it is you want to do next. but always looking at career pathing, look at the skills requirements and profiles for the next job you want, and have a conversation with your manager about, what ideally that should be part of the PMA process, is that honest discussion about where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses, and what kind of training might be able to fill those gaps. But again, Danny, that question about how do you find the right training for you, your experience on that, having worked in finance in the public sector.
Yeah, I went through the same questioning for myself. When I started for the government, I wasn't sure where I want to go, right? So I guess for me, you have to have an idea, a sense of where you want to be. Do you want to become an executive in the government, or do you want to stay just in the ranks of the middle managers? Do you want to stay exactly where you are? Do you want to go outside in the private sector? Where do you see yourself 5, 10, 20 years from now? Because you need to get those skills to get there. I will caution, however, I do hear this from my members sometimes, will say, oh, I want to be a CFO. And I said, do you have a good grasp on what a CFO does? He says, yeah, I work with the numbers. The CFO doesn't work with numbers, right? The numbers are done. The CFO it's 90% people skills. So if you're saying this is what job I want, don't necessarily think 20 years down the road. Think maybe your next step. Now have an idea of where you want to go, but before you decide you want to be that, aim for that objective, talk to someone who is in that job to see, is this a job I'd be interested in, and what skills are required, and what gap do I have to actually get there? If you're not sure, like Joe said, talk to your manager. But one thing is certain. Investing in training for soft skills is never a waste, because soft skills apply to any job that you do. I don't care if you're a plumber, if you're a dentist, if you're a financial officer, soft skills apply everywhere. It's a transferable skills. That's why I say you should always have a portion of the soft skills, but the technical skills, yeah, maybe if you want to become a senior auditor, well, maybe you should look into getting a certified internal auditor, right? Certain things you might need to get. So this is really dependent case by case. Have a chat with your manager, see where you want to go, but make sure you have a good grasping of where you want to go. Is it really what you think it is? We talked a bit about there's a question here, can ACFO release a CPA mentorship program for the controllership group? This one is challenging because CPA is very controlling about their brand and partnerships. It's not to say we couldn't set it up, but the best way for us to do this is through networking opportunities, right? If when we offer webinars like this, the fact that you're here today, you're trying to do more for your career and help out. But networking, connecting, mentorship, that goes hand in hand. So one of the things we started last year is a job shadowing day. We started a job swap. But these things don't necessarily take off because people don't necessarily want to put in the work in it. So remember, your career, you're responsible for it. You got to take charge. No one is going to really take you by the hand and say, we're going to put you there and do this. And no, you've got to actually keep the initiative. So whenever you hear ACFO has a networking opportunity, a town hall, anytime you have a room of our members together, come. I'm telling you, this is the best way to actually meet. Mentorship, you have the Forward program. If you have an idea that makes sense, let us know. We're more than happy to get things started, but we're limited in our resources. We got to make sure is the best way to get as most outreach as possible. Joe, did you talk about the CV inventory? There's a new call-out's going to be coming out, right?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. So the CV inventory, like I said, it's open now. You can go in now. You don't have to wait to be invited to update your information as well. You can go in, submit a new form. But the problem right now is that it's a very manual management at our end. And that was basically, we just wanted to use the tools we already had at our disposal and set this up as a proof of concept. And the concept has been proven. There's been enough use of it that we're in the process now of looking for a new platform that's going to make it a little easier. So for example, right now, if you want to update your information, you just have to submit a new form. And then at our end, we go and find the most recent form and delete all the older ones. It's not the best system in the world, but if you're interested in maintaining your place in the CV inventory with updated information, that's the way to do it for now. But as part of the overall rethink of the spring tune-up and moving some of the stuff online, we're looking at other ways to make that CV inventory a bit more flexible and a little bit more dynamic because we've seen the demand for it. There was a question as well about the application deadline. I'll just answer that really quickly. Yes, the original deadline for applications was June 19th, and we will be extending that deadline as well. We try to give about a month to make sure applications have a chance to come in. So because we've had to pause it, we're going to be recalibrating the program a little bit. Yes, that deadline will be extended. So those are those two answers. And while I'm on a roll, just because I know we're running short on time, I'll answer one another one. The virtual spring tune-up be on the same dates. We're still looking at that. We're hoping to put it around the same time. Like Danny said, we're going to be expanding it over to 2 days instead of 1. Still figuring out what to do with the Spring Tune-Up Plus aspect of it as well. So more information will be coming on that in the near future, but it'll be around the same timeline for sure. Danny, over to you for a couple. There's a question there about English essential positions, something on business cards. I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I'll take those, and I'll just add on so when it comes to the spring tune-up, I know you guys are doing your learning plans shortly, right? So although we don't know, we can't confirm the exact dates, the exact format. When you're doing your learning plans, reserve 2 days for ACO events. One's going to be the spring tune-up, which is free, might be over two afternoons, but it's going to be 1 day worth. The other one will probably be a spring tune-up plus. So another day that's on a cost recovery model, so it might be $300 or $400, but again, it's going to be high-level keynote speakers. And the reason we charge for the second day is because the first day is funded from the JCDP, so it's funded from the $1 Million Fund. The second day is funded from the departments because we see the value in these courses. We bring these speakers in to really share their experience. So in your learning plans, you take 2 days, and budget-wise, probably going to be at most $400 at most. But just lock that in so you can actually and then figure out the rest afterwards. Question here on business cards. Can ACFO provide members with business cards for networking similar to headshots done last year? Interesting question. I've received this one before. The reason I'm not going with the business cards for 2 reasons. The first one is because members change departments, change jobs, so we have to reprint them. It would be a lot of work for us money-wise, logistically. We need to have your information, you update us. And the second reason is I don't recommend people use business cards anymore. I will tell you, when someone gives me a business card, I'll put it in my pocket, and then what do I do with this afterwards, right? If you want to get yourself out, Joe has one right there. Well, we couldn't see him, but Joe just showed his. If you want to network, update your social media, get yourself on LinkedIn. Guys, I know we're like, well, who cares about LinkedIn? You see people moving on LinkedIn. You can congratulate people. You can keep in touch with people. LinkedIn is the best way to stay connected and meet new people, because like your Facebook feed, it'll say, oh, you know such so and such, you might know this person. And when you're looking for a job or you're ready to go for a promotion or a deployment, this is one of the best ways is to reach out to people. So we're not providing business cards, but we're definitely the face shots we did, because your face doesn't change, right? I mean, it might over the years, but it stays the same. So you have a nice headshot that you have, and we're going to bring that back, by the way, because it was a massive success. So we want to help you guys promote yourself so you can develop yourself in your career. Question here: if my position is English essential only, how do I convince my manager to approve me for full-time language training if I want to progress in my career? I touched on this one before, so I won't go into the full detail, but the number one way to do it is make yourself useful. Indicate to your manager that, you know what, I want to continue to progress in my career, and the next step would require me to be bilingual. Do you see me, first of all, don't ask about language training. Do you ask your boss, do you see me progressing to the next step at some point? What do you think I need to work on? And then hopefully they'll be honest with you and tell you what you need to work on. And then you can slide in there, thanks for your feedback. I think it's right, I should work on this. And do you think at some point I could work on my language? Because one of the barriers is my language profile, right? So you want to spin it in that you want to add organization to the value, not just you help me, help me, help me. No, it's a two-way street here. So position it that I'm adding value. I want to work on things so I can progress in my career. And would you be willing to shell out some bucks to actually help me do that? If it's not working well, let us know. Like if the only thing you want in your learning plan is language training, because we've seen this before. People said, I don't need any mandatory courses. I've done that. I'm not interested in technical courses, soft skills. I've done them all. The only thing I want is $1,000 part-time language training. And my boss said no. Contact us. I mean, language training part-time, there's no reason why your boss should say no, especially if you only want $1,000. Joe, over to you for some more questions on JCDP.
Yeah, we're coming up on 1 o'clock, so I'll answer a couple of these quickly, then I'll throw it over to you to close it off, maybe, Danny. So if I already applied for the JCDP, do I have to apply again? Unfortunately, the answer is yes. And the reason is because as we're retooling the program, especially with having to move the Spring Tune-Up online, the Spring Tune-Up is the biggest budget item that we have in the fund. And so that suddenly frees up a lot of money. So we are looking at the offering of courses is going to be changing so substantially that it's just easiest to have people apply again. I know it's a bit of a pain, but the benefit is when you're applying again, you're going to be able to apply for more things. There's going to be more stuff that you have access to. So it's going to be well worth your time to go in and reapply, because it does allow us to offer a bit more. The question about auditors being allowed to take the JCDP courses. So the funding for the JCDP comes out of the FI collective agreement. The collective agreement represents the CT FINs. So for now, things like classroom courses are being restricted just to people with the CT FIN who fall under the FI collective agreement. Although you can imagine we're working hard to make sure that is expanded out to the full group in future collective agreements. Larger events, we're able to invite auditors in because the event cost doesn't change dramatically based on the number of people in the room. But for the smaller scale stuff, unfortunately, for now, it's restricted just to people who are covered by the FI collective agreement until we're able to change that. Apparently, we cleared up a whole whack of questions by doing that. So that was great. Danny, I'll throw it over to you, the last one, and to wrap us up. So I'm going to say goodbye and thanks everyone for their time, and I'll leave it to Danny to take us home.
Thanks, Joe. Look, this question was actually brought up by one of the members, and actually the Controller General's office looked into this. The question is, could you just give every member their same share, their share of the $1 million fund this year to spend on PD as they see fit, right? So I get where you're coming from. It's $1 million. Say we got about 5,000 members, $200 a piece. Just give people their money, and they decide what they do, right? So there's two reasons I wouldn't do that. First one is, if we were to proceed this way, you would never see this money. Because again, for you to get this money, it has to go from the top level and trickle down all the way down to you. There's movement. Your manager, when they cut, was the first place they cut? Training, right? So you would actually never see this money. The second reason I wouldn't do it is because by pooling the funds together, we can provide you with newer training, more relevant training on a bigger scale that you wouldn't have access to, right? Economies of scale. So that's the reason why we're really focusing on training that's specific, that all our members can benefit from, that normally they wouldn't have access to. So I'm glad we went through all those questions. I hope you guys enjoyed today's webinar on professional development. We know what's important for you guys, and next week we'll be talking about the career development, how to conquer competitions. Our special guest will be Shauna Noss from the Office Controller General. She is actually the lead. She is the person that was vetting the 1,500 applications that came through the FI3 and FI4 competition last year, the external one. These are massive competitions. She's got good advice. She spoke before at our event. Don't miss that. I'll share some tips as well on how to get to the next level. So friends, be there next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe. Thank you to Joe. Thanks to everyone. See you next week, friends. Bye-bye.